حتى الآن بننتظر أحر من الجمر إنه تقف هذه الإبادة.
All right, viewers, with that, we shift our focus away from the Middle East towards the war in Europe. Now, Kremlin has issued a statement saying that Kiev is counting on positive developments on the front lines, but the actual situation indicates otherwise. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had earlier stated that Ukraine's Prime Minister, the head of presidential office, and a senior sanctions advisor will head to the United States early next week for talks with American officials. He's also stated that topics include air defense, energy and sanction steps, as well as negotiation track 2. The issue of frozen assets will also be discussed with the US. With us on the broadcast is Mr. Mark Sutherland, a geopolitical commentator, joining us from London. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World. Now, Zelensky's fresh comments come after he claimed that his forces are dealing heavy losses to Russian troops in eastern Donetsk. He's highlighted gains in Dobropila, which is north of Pokrovsk, which is a strategic logistics hub that Moscow has been targeting relentlessly. On the other hand, we've also seen claims by Russian President Vladimir Putin that Moscow is maintaining the initiative across frontline sectors, announcing the recapture of nearly 5,000 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory this year. In your assessment, who has the upper hand on the front line?
Good to be with you. And again, you got a very, very good question, because we constantly have this fight to get through the propaganda mist that at times the Russians throw up. As I have discussed previously on the channel, we are looking, in my humble opinion, it's a bit like being back at the First World War and trench warfare. Some other analysts who are based on the ground doing incredible work would turn around and say that the Russians are taking X amount of kilometers, and then the Ukrainians will then say, well, in this particular area, we're actually taking it back, putting in the context of 1 million men that the Russians have lost, along with armaments, and the Ukraine having been invaded from the February 2021. The Russians at one point, I think Putin turning around saying, you know, we'll have this finished in 3 days. That has not happened, because they are then bogged down, but they have taken 20% of Ukrainian territory. As I say, it's at times so difficult to get through the propaganda. And also, as you raised, that Zelensky will be going off to America, or delegations from the Ukraine, to then discuss further sanctions on the energy production that Russia then produces, to then finance their war machine. Hence why drones have been heading towards those assets on a regular basis on the Ukraine side. Over to you.
Indeed, and speaking of Zelensky's visit, I beg your pardon, the visit of his senior officials to the United States, Zelensky had recently requested for Tomahawk missiles. Putin fired back, stating that this could damage Russia's ties with the United States. In the meantime, Moscow has also stated that momentum for the peace deal after the Trump-Putin summit in Alaska has been exhausted. In light of these recent statements, can we then expect the Americans to go ahead and fast-track delivery of Tomahawks to the Ukrainians?
Well, the unfortunate thing is that on all fronts, we could very easily sit back and say this just seems an escalation. There just seems no end to this. We need both parties around the table to stop and say no. And the cynical part of me, in regard to the way that certain European economies are going, that one way you then suddenly think, oh, wouldn't this be a way to boost things or sort things out? Then we need to continue a war here, or step up, which may sound an absolutely appalling thing to say, because we have to then look ahead in a couple of years' time of the ramifications for this. You take Tomahawk missiles into the theatre of war, bought by NATO, bought by other European countries of America. You then put ballistic missiles that have a range of 1,000 to 1,500. They've also been proven in the theatre of war. But the Russians have said this will not be a panacea. You do this, they're then concerned about Well, who is directing them? Will there be American troops then potentially on the ground to fire these in the direction of Russian cities? You can then argue very clearly that this is then an escalation. But however, unfortunately, in February 2022, the Russians invaded a sovereign country. In 1994, we asked Ukraine to get rid of their nuclear weapons, and we are now in this situation. We've also had various color revolutions. There is so much to drill down on, from propaganda and trying to work out what is the truth. It is a huge job in itself. But we want this to end. But I don't see that happening quite yet.
Indeed. And speaking of Europe at large, we've seen NATO's response has been very cautious up until now, very calibrated. They've not really escalated things to a point of a hot war. We did see Poland mobilize certain jets, but nothing has really escalated to the point of direct confrontation with Russia. In the meantime, France has in fact intercepted an oil tanker that it claims is a part of Russia's shadow fleet. Could we then expect other European nations to follow suit and then increase pressure on Russia economically, particularly in the Baltic?
You raise a point in regard to Poland's reaction. There was drone incursions into their country, and frankly, if these things happen, unidentified objects, then they need to be shot down, period, in my humble opinion, no matter what country they then think, what direction they think they're coming from. We've also seen what's happened in Copenhagen, and then, like in Poland, then all civil airports are then shut down and people can't fly around. In extremely disrupting. And the challenge is to the European economies, which are not in a good place whatsoever, thanks to these technocrats. The bottom line is, they're then turning around saying we've got to increase our GDP to then spend on defense. The UK has been talking about that, but in many ways, a lot of that is projected down the line when you can argue it's needed now. But our economy is in an appalling position, to say the least. So where are people going to get the money for this to then keep providing money to military industrial complexes around the world and then produce this munitions? As I say, the European economies are not in a good place at all. They were discussing that in regard to Copenhagen a couple of days ago, plus the security conference. So people are saying a lot, but also people then need to start acting and then starting to look at how they can rearm, to actually project strength, to stop, to give a warning to Russia and the aggression that is then happening in that region. To you.
Indeed, and another quick question, another crucial aspect that the Ukrainian officials are likely to raise with the Americans is the frozen Russian assets. We do know that Ursula von der Leyen has revealed a plan of using these assets and giving loans to Ukraine. She's termed them as reparations, but these loans are touted to be given in tranches, so it's more of a long-term project. So what then would help Ukraine in the short term?
This whole debate of taking those assets, we know that when Finland fired that off, and the fact that it would be would back up the loans that would be given to the Ukrainians, and then get that frozen asset to then pay for it, because there would be, if this war ends, the reparations that they would then demand, that there would be a lot of foot dragging in that regard. And also remember, within Europe, there are very strong regulations in regard to dealing with banks and in regard to getting that money out. Europe have a long history of that, particularly after the Second World War, and where were all these assets, for argument's sake, that have been taken off the Jewish people within that theatre, within the European theatre during the Second World War. So there is strict banking regulations, and of course Europe wants to roll even more of that out. But they will have to look at this. There is up to 200 billion, maybe just a bit more than that, of frozen assets. And as you quickly raised, about a shadow tanker off France. This whole shadow fleet of Russia has to be dealt with, because that is then shipping oil around, and people have to make those kinds of decisions very fast. And just finally, as President Trump has pointed out, with Europe and where it gets his energy from, it ends up getting some of that energy from Russia. So in fact, he's paying for perpetuality for this war to continue. It's extremely messy and extremely difficult to get through this mire and work out what's happening. But van der Leyen has announced even more sanctions. If they are serious about this, then they really need to push those. Thank you.
All right, sir, requesting you to stay on with us as we shift our focus away towards another crucial development. According to a joint statement released by North Korea's state media, North Korea has expressed firm solidarity with Russia's stance on the crisis in Ukraine and has given full support for Moscow's military operations. This comes as the deputy head of the Russian Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, holds talks in Pyongyang with Jo Yong-won, who is the secretary of the Central Committee of the Workers' Party of Korea. These discussions are part of celebrations marking the 80th anniversary of the founding of North Korea's ruling Workers' Party that is slated to be held. Meanwhile, earlier this year, in July, North Korea's Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un had reiterated that Pyongyang stood by all measures taken by the Russian leadership to what he claims is the root cause of the Ukrainian crisis and to address this. Now, he'd held talks with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, where he had expressed these sentiments. Still with us on the broadcast is Mr. Mark Sutherland. We have seen, in fact, reports, videos as well of North Korean troops fighting the war for Russia in Ukraine. I wanted to understand from you, what exactly does North Korea have to gain from all of this?
Very, very good question. Look at the recent SCO conference in China. Look at the relationships. Of course, India was there. Putin is there. Even Dan Andrews from Australia was there, and that's another question. But of course, Kim Jong was there as well. And let's just remember, North Korea, as far as I'm concerned, is a completely tyrannical state, dictatorship, and it's about, of course, then wanting to then be accepted where he can on an international stage. We remember when President Trump crossed over the border, everyone thought Donald Trump was going to cause Third World War. That didn't happen, thank goodness, but it wasn't going to. But this is about his own publicity, to me. And then the other thing is that North Korea, unfortunately, is building, getting longer range ballistic missiles, so it can then threaten people around it, threaten other nations around it. I just see it as a appalling PR exercise for him. But let's just remember this: we are dealing with, where North Korea is concerned, and like others, we don't have time to say this, but is a tyrannical state. And of course he would say that to then back other people that are along with the same ideology to you.
Indeed, since you've spoken about Donald Trump, we do know that there have been efforts by the South Korean administration. Lee Jae-myung has been extending an olive branch repeatedly, but you know, Kim Jong-un has been rebuffing these attempts. He cited drills between Seoul and Washington. He's also the Ulchi Freedom Shield exercises that have taken place recently. He's also cited trilateral drills with Japan's involvement too. We've also seen a meeting between Lee Jae-myung and Donald Trump at the Oval Office, and Trump once again expressing his inclination to meeting with Kim Jong-un. Do you think such a meeting is possible?
I mean, it'd be fantastic if it was. You are quite right in that they have been, South Korea has been reaching out to say, well, we need to sit down and have a discussion, because they have this tyranny on their border. It is possible. The most important thing is to keep trying to reach out, because if you, with all the countries that you've named, when we're looking at all the different pieces of the world in regard to how these nations wish to then exert their power. Things are really moving. And if we are that, well, I am concerned, as I'm sure that many people listening will be concerned as well. And we should be paying attention, because this is how then wars then escalate, and then suddenly are we then finding ourselves in a third world war across the world, which is something on a personal level I don't want to see. But we could see people flexing their muscles, and if they're like China are in regard to flexing their muscles economically, as they want to be the number one in economy in the world and bypass America. We can see all of these things. And remember as well is that President Trump does see this in regard to what China is doing, and sees China as the number one threat to the American hegemony, and that is recognized by President Trump, which then means that if you are then having other issues to look at, you wish to tidy those up. You wish to get these things sorted out because you want to address what you perceive as the main threat upon your nation that you have to deal with, and that is the undermining of American hegemony.
And speaking of China, interestingly, when Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un met recently, the joint statement that was put out, China did not mention, it omitted any reference to denuclearization of North Korea. This is something that it has been referring to time and again, but this time around it did not. With that, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Sutherland, for taking out time and speaking to us on NewsX World.